Is this helping? I mean, people, all right. If I start talking too much jargon, just let me know. So in the dynamics section, you've got what's called a gate and a compressor. And what the gate does, how do I draw this?
Beautiful.
All right.
Sure.
Huh?
Beautiful.
Yeah, right. So you've got a signal coming in from a microphone, right? And then you set the gate at a specific level, like let's just say -30. That's really low. If this signal is coming in below -30, the mic mutes itself, which I'm sure you guys were having a problem with last month, I think.
Yeah, we were having yeah.
Rarely,
I called David, I was like, what am I doing?
she said it instantly, I was like, it sounds like you have a gate on. So,
I remember them talking about that. Yeah.
so rarely in a live situation would I use a gate, because remember, I mute things that aren't being used. If you're just gonna leave all your mics on, then yeah, you might wanna do this, but then you have to make sure your singer is so precise and consistent with how they speak into the microphone. You've gotta set this so you know your singer's always gonna hit that. You know, you gotta make sure your singer always is here when they're not talking, which, you know, at sound check they may be talking here, and then when they get into the, you know, I call it a show, I'm sorry, it's just habit. When you get into the thing, you might have the microphone out here, you may be engaging with the audience, but then at sound check, you're back here, test, Mr. Engineer. Oh yeah, it sounds great. Performance, oh yeah, hey everybody. And you're like, okay, you lost 10 dB by just taking the microphone that far away from your face. A lot of people that aren't professionals don't realize that on TV and music videos and stuff, you can have the mic anywhere, because TV studios don't have to worry about feedback. They don't have to worry about gain. They can crank the gain at their control booth as much as they want, because they'll never feed back, you know? But in a live situation, we do have to worry about feedback. So that singer needs to have their microphone as close to their lips as humanly possible and be consistent, you know, which in the real world we all know doesn't happen the same way every single time. So I rarely use gates. The drum kit is the one exception, because you might get a lot of bleed from mic to mic if you don't. But again, if the drummer's not that consistent, you may run into a situation where mics aren't opening when they hit that drum head. And 9 times out of 10, I have to set the threshold so low, like -50 on a drum, that any drum's gonna open that gate anyway. So unless you've got a lot of time and a consistent drummer, I wouldn't even worry about using it. I just take it off and deal with the bleed. Bleed on a drum kit isn't necessarily a bad thing, because you can get rid of a lot of the bleed with EQ. For instance, on the snare drum, cut out everything under 400 hertz. What do you want to hear on the snare drum? The tap, right? So people can clap along with it. On the kick drum, you don't need anything over 500 hertz. Well, you may want to hear the beater, you know what I mean, if you've got the microphone inside the drum head. Again, overheads, you may want to cut a lot of that low stuff out, you know what I mean? So it's your low frequencies that are going to bleed anyway. So, and bleed into the other mics might even help you with it sounding more rich and full. I know on Broadway a lot, the common practice is to put them in ISO booths and control the drum kit so much. Sometimes it sounds like V drums to me, you know, like the virtual electronic drums. Nobody likes those. Do you like them? No. They feel weird. They sound goofy, they never sound right, you know what I mean? But there's no stage volume to them, which is why audio designers love them. But anyway, I went to see Frozen last week, and I was like, I think that's a real kit, but they controlled it so much with gates, compressors, EQ, isolation, that it just didn't sound natural. It didn't sound like a real instrument to me. It sounded fake. But anyway, so any more questions on gates? I mean, it's pretty much, it mutes the mic for you unless it's getting a hot signal, which I don't really like. Like if there's a vocalist not singing, pull the fader down. You know, if they get a little bleed on stage and their monitor's fine, but you don't want that airy hiss in the mains anyway. So just pull the fader down. Even if you just pull it down like 5 to 10 dB. you know? Get in the habit of working the faders, you know? As an audio mixer, I don't think of myself as there to enjoy the show. I'm working, you know? I'm constantly looking at who's doing what. If the guitarist is sitting there doing nothing, I bring his fader down, you know? You just got to be in the practice of keep moving it. I think all too often people get in the habit of just setting it at sound check, being like, oh, it sounds fine, now I'm just going to enjoy the show with everybody. It's not the case. Audio mixer, you're always working. Always be scanning the stage, looking at what people are doing, muting things that aren't being used. Get it out of it.
So pretty much for her, we shouldn't concern ourselves with the gate part of it.
I wouldn't. I mean, unless you've got a lot of time and a consistent musician, try it out. It can help. I think they're more useful in studio applications because then you can go back a lot of times and
We
redo it.
train musicians every single week, so.
Right.
Yeah.
At the Journey, like one of our mixers at the Journey is a studio guy. He does mostly studio work. John. Well, he used to. Him and Max did a lot of studio work. John does a lot more small club venues now. But he loves gates. And he loves panning, which in a live environment, I don't like panning either. And that's because if you've got this guitarist over here panned to the left so that it sounds more localized, then your audience member over on the right isn't getting as much as that guitar. That's just my theory, but that's a tangent anyway. But he loves doing that kind of stuff. And it can help if you're doing it right. But for basic operation, I would just pan everything center, leave the gates out of it, and then just go on your merry way. Just mute and pull down the faders when they're not being used. All right, so that's gates. I'd leave them off. A compressor protects you from overdriving something. So say you've got a signal coming in and you've got your compressor set at -30. If that signal goes above -30, it squashes it down to underneath it. So it won't let you go above whatever you set that threshold to be. And then the ratio of it, say it's a 2-to-1 ratio, it'll take a signal, like say this is your 30 dB signal, it'll squash it down. This is a hard graphic to explain. I have a book that I learned this out of. But say this is 30 here. 2-to-1 will roughly make this down to like -15. It'll squash it down. Does that make sense? Like it'll come in, and it's not going to mute the mic. It's just going to bottle it. Yes, great word. And the higher your ratio, the tighter this is going to be. And you can go up to like 20-to-1 ratio. That's extreme. That's more like a limiter. You know what I mean? This compressors help you with your dynamics. Say if your band does a really quiet song and your next song is a really loud rock number, then you may want a compressor in there so that your softer song is more even to the ear than the loud song. I was telling Bruce this yesterday that a lot of modern rock albums are really highly compressed because they can get a lot of volume all at the same level. You know what I mean? It's not like your old Pink Floyd albums or your old Zeppelin albums that are highly dynamic in range per song. Your modern rock songs all kind of sound even. Every instrument kind of sounds even. Again, I don't use a lot of compression. We don't use a lot of compression in musical theater because a lot of times the musicians are good enough to work their own dynamic range. They know maybe sing a little bit stronger if it's a quiet song so that it's more even. But just to even things out, you can use a compressor. On a vocal, the ratio, I wouldn't go very high. Sorry, going back to the limiter, like a 20-to-1, it's just going to keep the level from going above that at all costs. It'll just clip it, won't let it do it. The lower the ratio, the more it's kind of going to let it cheat and stay the same level. You're just more like protecting your speakers. You know what I mean? I'll demonstrate compression on the board, but your compressor basically just squashes the signal from getting too loud. You know, and it can start to sound unpleasant if it's overdone. So and you'll see on the compressor, there'll be a meter of what's coming in. There'll be the input meter, and then there'll be a meter coming in from the top that's showing you how many dB you're compressing the signal. So usually if it's compressing it over like 6 dB, then I back off, because that's when it starts to sound muddy and sound compressed. And once you get used to how it's supposed to sound, you'll notice it when it happens. And you'll be like, that's too much, and you just back off. And then there's another thing in compression, another feature called the knee, and it might be, like if you look at a sloping on a graph, like if this is your dB, and it's can be, this is hard to draw too. I might just have to show you on the board, but the knee, the Knee, is how this slope is. Like if it's a really hard knee, it'll just cut it off like that. If it's a sloping knee, it's not as obvious to your ear. And you can control that here too, and I'll show you that on the board. So yeah, let's look at the